Okay, just picture this for a second. A disaster so huge, so total, that the very land a country sits on starts to collapse. I'm not talking about just an earthquake or a tsunami. I'm talking about the ground itself giving way. Now, this isn't some sci-fi movie plot. It's a real-world scenario that forces us to ask one of the scariest questions you can imagine.
So what does happen when an entire nation, one that has dozens of nuclear power plants right on its coastline, suffers a complete geological breakdown? We're not talking about a single accident here. We are talking about the very real possibility of every single one of them failing, all at once. And that's not a threat to just one country. That is a threat to the entire planet.
33. That's the number. 33 commercial nuclear reactors are sitting right on the coast of Japan, and every single one is vulnerable. Each one is basically a ticking time bomb if the worst happens. Because if they lose their cooling systems, we don't just lose a nation. We could literally lose the entire Pacific Ocean. So how could this possibly happen? And more importantly, what could anyone even do about it? Let's dive in.
So here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, we're going to tackle the science of this planetary emergency. We'll get into why you can't just, flip an off switch. Then we'll look at humanity's incredible, almost Hollywood-style rescue plan. But after that, things get real. We're going to face a brutal reality check where that amazing plan goes up against a real-world disaster. And finally, we'll land on the only option that's actually left.
All right, Section 1, the planetary emergency. Now, you're probably thinking, okay, in a disaster, you just shut down the reactors, right? Problem solved. Well, if only it were that easy. A nuclear reactor doesn't have an off switch like your lamp does. There's this fundamental force of nature at play here that makes this whole scenario so uniquely dangerous. And that force is called decay heat. The best way to think about it is like a kettle that you can never, ever unplug. Even after you've shut down the reactor, the nuclear fuel inside just keeps generating a massive amount of heat. And it does this for years. So it has to be cooled, constantly, with a steady flow of water. If that cooling stops for any reason, the fuel melts right through its container, and then you get a catastrophic release of radiation.
And that right there is the heart of this nightmare scenario. If the land itself sinks or gets pushed up by an earthquake, the pipes pulling in seawater for cooling, they get destroyed. The power grid, it collapses. The pumps, they stop working. And all of a sudden, you have 33 of those unstoppable kettles all boiling over at the exact same time. This goes way beyond a national disaster. This is an event that could turn the single largest body of water on Earth into a dead zone.
So when you're facing a planetary-level catastrophe and a national government is basically paralyzed, what on earth can you do? Well, let's move into Section 2 because this is where humanity's grand rescue plan comes into play. This is the part of the story where the world comes together for a mission that is just truly audacious.
The whole mission would get its authority from a beefed-up version of an international rule called Responsibility to Protect, or RDP. Now, normally this is for when a government can't protect its own people from, say, a genocide. But 33 simultaneous meltdowns? That's a disaster for the entire planet. So in our scenario, the UN Security Council would use RDP to step in and take charge.
So the plan would roll out in these very clear steps. First, the UN invokes R2P. Step 2, a brand new emergency agency gets created. Let's call it the International Nuclear Salvage Authority, or INSA. Then you deploy a global A-team of elite nuclear engineers. We're talking nuclear blue helmets. And they have one job and one job only. Get the most dangerous stuff, the spent nuclear fuel, out of those power plants. Now, with all the roads and railways totally destroyed, the only way in or out is by sea. But you can't just throw nuclear fuel on any old cargo ship. No. You need a floating fortress, and that's where the PNTL fleet comes in. Get this, there are only 3 of these ships in the entire world. These things are absolute marvels of engineering. They have the highest possible safety rating, called INF3, which means they're built to survive missile attacks and massive collisions. They even have their own cooling systems just for the cargo, plus armed guards. These are humanity's nuclear lifeboats. Okay, but before you can move the fuel, you have to keep it cool. And with the whole country's power grid down, how do you run the cooling pumps? The answer is just brilliant. You bring the power plant to the reactor. They're called power ships, huge floating power stations that can just anchor offshore, run a cable to the plant, and boom, you have instant, stable electricity. And because they're on the water, they're totally immune to the earthquakes that are tearing the land apart.
It's a pretty heroic plan, isn't it? You've got a global team, incredible technology, a clear mission. It really feels like it could work.
But now we come to Section 3, the brutal reality check. And we don't need to guess how this plan would hold up, because on January 1st, 2024, the Noto Peninsula earthquake in Japan gave us a real-world stress test. And, well, the results were sobering.
After looking at what happened in disasters like the Noto quake, the experts have reached a conclusion that is just stark and frankly terrifying. And I want you to really hear this. Large-scale transport of nuclear material during a geological catastrophe is factually impossible. That amazing grand plan? It has a fatal flaw.
Let's just put this into perspective. Even under normal, calm, perfectly planned conditions, with all the roads and ports working fine, it takes a minimum of 15 to 20 years to safely decommission a single nuclear power plant. That's the baseline. The idea that you could just quickly evacuate 33 plants in the middle of a national collapse, it just doesn't line up with the laws of physics and engineering.
But honestly, the biggest problem isn't even getting the fuel out of the plants. It's where would you even take it? In Japan, the main destination is the Rokusho reprocessing plant. Construction on this place started way back in 1993. And as of 2024, its opening has been delayed, wait for it, 27 times. The new target is 2027, but nobody's holding their breath. You just can't base an emergency rescue mission on a facility that's been almost done for 3 decades.
So let's just look at the scorecard. The grand plan said, we'll use the ports. The reality of the Noto quake? The coastline itself was pushed up by 4 meters, making the ports completely useless. The plan assumed they could use roads. Reality? The roads were wiped out by landslides. The plan relied on getting external power. Reality? A nearby plant almost lost its own power connection because of damage, showing how fragile those links are. And the plan to ship it all to Rokusho? Well, we just saw that's not happening. Every single core assumption of the grand rescue plan was completely shattered by one real earthquake.
Okay, let's just pause for a second and review where we've been. We started with this terrifying problem, 33 reactors with that unstoppable decay heat. Then we looked at the heroic, ideal solution, this international rescue fleet coming to save the day. But then we hit the harsh reality, proven by a real earthquake, that the very things you need for an evacuation, roads, ports, power, are the first things that get destroyed. So if you can't move it, what do you do?
And that brings us to our final section, the only real option. The whole way of thinking about this problem has to change. If a dramatic evacuation is a fantasy, then the only logical strategy left is fortification. If you can't move the dangerous stuff away from the disaster, you have to make it so strong that it can withstand the disaster right where it is.
And here's how you do it. Right now, a lot of the used nuclear fuel is kept in what's called wet storage. Basically, they're giant swimming pools that need constant electricity to run the pumps that circulate the cooling water. They're very vulnerable. The alternative is dry cask storage. These are enormous, sealed containers made of steel and concrete. And here's the absolute game changer. They're cooled passively by natural airflow. They need zero electricity. They are built to survive massive earthquakes, airplane crashes, you name it. They are the ultimate nuclear bunkers. So the real strategy, the one that's actually happening around the world, is on-site hardening. It's not glamorous, it's the slow, careful, but absolutely essential job of moving spent fuel out of those fragile pools and locking it away inside these incredibly tough dry casks, right there on the power plant's property. It's a strategy that's all about self-reliance, not a last-minute rescue. Which leaves us with this final, really interesting question. The story of a global armada sailing in to save the day is exciting. It's what we want to believe in. But reality tells us it's just not going to happen. Instead, it seems that for the absolute worst-case scenario, true preparedness isn't about a dramatic escape. It's about having the wisdom to build a fortress so strong that the best plan of all is simply to stay put.